Hi everyone. In this clip, what we're going to be doing is starting to block in some of our material callouts. So what we got to figure out first is, what is a material callout? Well, the fact of the matter is we're dealing with a stylized concept. Now, we could refine this concept a lot more, making sure that every little detail is figured out, and so that we've got texture in here and some real clarity as to exactly what each and every single material is. But the problem is that can be really, really time consuming, and a concept artist's time needs to be spent wisely. So what we want to do is start to do some callouts, basically suggesting what kind of material a texture artist or a modeler should look at to figure out what some of the detailed handling might be of that surface. Now, because this is stylized, in some cases this doesn't happen for some processes. But for us, it will work well to do some basic callouts so that we get an idea of what the structure could be from a more small micro level. To do that, let's look at some of our references. So when we look at some of these reference pieces, it's really useful for us to grasp certain small details that we're seeing here. So for example, the materialization that's going on this metal and this gold is really interesting. I can look through a lot of these other images and start to see which ones might actually be what I want, but in the end, that will be the one that I'm going to constantly come back to, or this piece. The more references you have, the more you can find callouts like this. I like the wear and tear that's going on towards these back edges. Now I can start to paint that in myself, and in fact, a little bit of that may be useful, but it's worthwhile to just grab material callouts like this. So let's just drop in this kind of material callout. So inside Photoshop, I'm just going to zoom in and take basically some of the section here. It can be either a square or a circle, doesn't really matter too much. But you want to grab something that's really clear for what that material is. Now you could do a real small section of it, or the entire section if you want to give more clarity. But I recommend you always include these kind of images full scale for an actual artist to deal with later. But in this case, I'm just going to copy and I'm going to paste here, so that you can see what the material is going to be in this case. What I am going to do is also take all of these layers for all of my concept and just group it together as full concept. So this group I can now move around wherever I would like. So for example, I'll move it over to the side, take my material callout, and shrink it down a little bit. So that's pretty decent. So what I'll do is also start to put it into the appropriate location. Now if I wanted to as well, I could add some saturation by just opening up my hue and saturation adjustment. I could start to shift its hues a little bit, maybe add a little bit more of that saturation in, just to kind of add that clarity that I'm looking for. Again, you can adjust these as you need to, maybe use bigger ones, smaller ones, it's up to you. But in this case, what I will do is also double click this layer so I can add in a stroke. By double clicking, I turn on layer styles, which allows me to basically put in some extra little information into this. So I'll add a little bit of a large stroke to this, and in a new layer, with a big brush with no pressure sensitivity, just draw a line from one point to another. There we go. You can just take these two pieces and kind of pull them off like that. That way, we're basically just pointing out the general direction where these things should go. Let's do a nice clean arrow here, though. There we go. And paint that in. That way, it's very clear for an artist that they're dealing with the gold section here. So that works well. What about the sword element? Let's come back to our references and start to find something that's going to work well for that. So in this case, for example, I'd start to look through these, start to figure out what material works. For example, this is far too corroded. That's not going to work well for us. Some pieces, like this, could work really, really nicely, but maybe it is also just still a little bit too corroded. The things you want to look for is zooming in to various sections and seeing if those blades work well or not. And figuring out what is going to be the most clear definition for another artist to look at and figure out. So in some cases, for example, we could zoom in here and start to see something that really does suggest the kind of metal that we want. I want something that looks a little bit used, kind of corroded, and something that's got some extra detail to it. This works really well for that. So I'm just going to take this, I can copy it, and just drop it into Photoshop immediately. So here we are in Photoshop, I can just paste, and I will get that section of the texture that I need. It's much larger than my image, which works really well. I can take this section here, Something like that is pretty good. I can copy and paste, scale it down a little bit so that it fits in this scene a little bit better. In this case too, let's just flip it upside down. Maybe even just flip it horizontally so that some of the value structure kind of matches this. So this will start to work out pretty decently for us. I'm just going to copy my effects, holding Alt, just dragging from the little effects button up here so that we repeat that. And in here, we'll do the same thing that we had before. Just make sure we're using the same sized piece. And then do that arrow again. And just fill that in. There we go. So it's clear that we're dealing with this is what the metal should look like, this is what the gold should look like, and finally we could figure out what that wrap looks like. But in some cases, you don't always need to call out every single material. In some cases, it's just worthwhile to just have some basic callouts so somebody knows what to work with. Now that's pretty good for us. So what we can do next is our final steps to create our concept package, which we'll do in our next clip.